All right, I think we'll get started here shortly. Hopefully some more people jump on. But if not, I'll give you guys some good stuff and we can make it a quick call for you. Do you guys, either of you have any questions before we start?
I don't think so.
Okay. Kaylin, you got anything you've got questions on right yet?
I don't have any questions right now, but thank you for doing these calls. I really do like them.
Yeah, no, I think it's helpful. And even if there's not a lot that are on there, we record them and save them for when people have questions about them. So
thank you.
Thank you for jumping on. So there's a couple things that I wanted to go through today. One is I've noticed that a lot of agents are getting really what I call lazy in some of our jobs. And I think of it, if you guys have ever been to a fast food restaurant lately, it just seems like the attentiveness of details is starting to go the way of somewhere. It's just not working out. I mean, it used to be where you could go to the fast food restaurant, you get your food and everything would be good. And now probably every other time that I go somewhere, you know, something's missing or something was wrong or something like that. Well, we're actually seeing that in business here as well. And so there's a couple things that I want to just point out that we're starting to miss, and they can be potentially big problems if we keep missing them. But we're not reading all of forms. So I have an agent who didn't look at their CD from the title when they went to close. They were thinking they were getting paid 6% because they were double siding it, and title only collected 5.5%. So then the question is, whose fault is that? And, you know, obviously the agent's missing 0.5%. Agent wants their money. The contract says it should be 6%. So they should have looked at that. And the seller agreed that they were going to pay the 6%, but only paid 5.5%. But now everything's closed and done. And now we have to go back and ask the seller to bring more money in. Now, some sellers are really open to that. And they're like, yeah, this is what I agreed to. I'm going to bring it in. But as you can imagine, you know, not every single situation comes back as smoothly. And you have to have an awkward conversation. So the question always comes up, who's at fault here? Us as agents really have the responsibility to make sure that we're reviewing all the documents. I had a seller once who signed all the documents, and then at the closing table said, well, I didn't agree to paying that. And I said, well, you did. Here's the contract. And their response to me was, I didn't read the contract. I'm not liable for that, even though they signed it. So we just want to make sure that you guys are reading through the contracts, making sure they're filled out right, the CDs, making sure that the numbers are correct. Don't just assume that the number was calculated correct. Actually, just do the math really quick, make sure that it's done correctly on that. I'm going to share the exclusive right to sell really quick so you can see that. This is a big error that we're seeing messed up a lot. If you look right here at the very first of this contract, you should be able to see the exclusive right to sell agreement. If you see this one, the effective date. The effective date is when we want to have the listing become effective, but it doesn't necessarily mean we don't have an agreement that's in place before that. This document can be signed prior to the effective date and still be a valid exclusive right to sell with you and your clients, but it might not be going on the MLS for, let's say, like 2 weeks or something. So this date right here doesn't necessarily have to be today's date. The other thing I'm seeing is in this terms of listing, this date right here, right in the middle, is when it expires. So if it was today's listing, then it would expire today if you wrote today's date right there. The other thing we're seeing, and we find this more towards the end of the year, where agents are taking a listing today and they're going 6 months out, which puts it into next year. So on the MLS, when you're putting in the date, it automatically populates to this year. So if you change to say March, which is 6 months from now, if you change to March, but you forget to change the date, then it's going to say March. Say you expired on March 1st, 2022, which is already passed. So I've seen a lot of exclusive right to sales come in that aren't valid because they actually expired this year when the agent was trying to put 2023 instead of 2022, which is automatically put in your contract just because we're in 2022. So it's kind of one of those errors that the computer is auto-populating your form, but if you don't change it, then you're going to find yourself in a little bit of an issue with that. Any questions on those two? That it's not a hard thing, and I don't think any of you guys are messing that up, but at the same time, it's what I call us being a little bit lazy. We're being a little bit lazy with how we are approaching our contracts because we're just not paying attention to those small details. And unfortunately, the story I was telling you about with the agent that didn't look at the CD, if the seller refuses to bring money in, that could cost them 0.5% just because of not checking the details on that. So we just want to be careful with that. Okay, and now I'm going to share with you. Let's see here. Oh, not that one. Okay, you should be able to see a time clause. I'm sharing the one that says option to keep your property on the market. So I wanted to go through a time clause really quick because there's been some confusion lately on when to use this and what do I do if I'm faced with this from the seller is asking for it or I'm the seller and we want to ask for this. So the option to keep the property on the market is with a time clause. So with you go under contract with a listing, can you continue showing the home and collecting more offers?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And if you decide to sign an offer, how would you, let's say that you decided to accept an offer, how would you accept that offer?
Don't you have to notify the person that you're already under contract with, give them their 48 hours or whatever to remove their contingency. And if they don't, then you can accept the next offer.
Okay, so you're talking about using this time clause. So before we jump into using the time clause, I'm just saying there's no time clause, just a regular contract you've accepted. Can you go ahead and keep showing it and accept another offer on that property?
Oh, I don't think so.
Well, if you can as a backup offer.
Yeah. Okay. So if you put it in, as long as you put it in as a backup offer position, then you can still do that. Okay?
Right.
So you can't push the primary offer out until and just put the backup in there. The time clause is what allows us to do that. So let's say that we go under contract and we want to accept another offer, we put it in a backup position. That backup position can never move into primary position unless the primary position backs out, unless we have this time clause that's put into the contract. So as all addendums, they're going to be incorporated into the REPC, which is that first paragraph. And if you look at option number 1, it's option to keep house on the market. That's the time clause. The right to accept other offers. So this is where we can accept offers. Buyer and seller agrees. The seller may continue to offer the property for sale and to accept any backup offer. Seller, in seller's sole discretion, may notify the buyer in writing of an accepted backup offer. So here's the scenario. What if I decide that I have this time clause in my contract now? Okay, the buyer and seller have agreed that I have a time clause in there. I'm marketing my property and I get an offer, and that offer is one that's good, but not necessarily as good as what I already have. Okay, do I have to notify the buyer that I have an offer in a backup offer accepted? Do you think I have to
believe so.
say it again?
I believe so.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so here's where it says, this is where it is right here. I highlighted the first paragraph under A. Seller, in seller's sole discretion, may notify buyer in writing of an accepted backup offer. So just because you accept a backup offer doesn't necessarily mean you need to notify the current buyer. Okay, if you're trying to move them out, you could notify them, and then we'll read on what happens after that. But let's just say that I get one that's okay, but we're 2 weeks away from our due diligence deadline. And I know that if I activate the time clause, they won't remove it because they have to sell a home, but everything seems to be going well. I might choose not to notify the buyer that I have an offer and let them continue working. Now, let's say that a week goes by and they're starting to get a little bit shaky on whether they're going to close or not. And now I decide, no, I'm going to now notify them that I have an offer in a backup position. And that goes down to section B, buyer's right to remove conditions. If the seller does provide written notice to the buyer, then the buyer shall have blank days. So it used to be where we call it 72 hours. You could actually put whatever you want there. You know, if you want 24 hours to remove it, 48 hours to remove it, 72 hours to remove it, you know, I mean, obviously you want to give them enough time to respond, because if they don't respond, then the contract automatically cancels, and that might not be what you want, especially if you have a backup position. This is a tricky thing, because if I have an offer in a backup position and the primary offer cancels, the backup offer is now the primary offer, right?
Jason, if the buyer in backup position, you notify them then that they're moving into primary position, they have the option to move into primary position, don't they?
Yeah, if they choose not to move into primary position, then they can say that we're not moving into primary position. Yes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so in this scenario though, let's say that I give them the primary offer 24 hours to respond and remove their conditions. And so I don't give them very much time. And so 24 hours goes by, they don't respond, so it automatically cancels their contract, but then they respond the next day, so 2 days after. So one day after they should have responded, they respond, they say, oh no, we're ready to go, we'll remove our contract. What's the problem that I just created?
Isn't it too late? The backup already moved into first position.
Correct. That's the problem. That's the thing we have to look at, is the backup offer automatically goes into first position unless what you were saying, they choose not to, but it automatically goes into position. So when you're putting in this time frame, just give them enough time to respond so you don't run into a problem that they won't remove them and they get bumped out of the primary position and you're starting over. That would not be a good thing. So you can put whatever time frame you want. I like 48 hours, 72 hours after notice. Now this is after notice. It didn't say after it was accepted. So the buyers, you put an offer in as a backup position and then it's accepted. It doesn't necessarily mean that I have to notify them right then, right away. I might wait a week and then say, okay, this is not going the way I want to. Now I'm going to notify the current primary offer that I have a backup position. Then once I've given them written notice, that time frame starts at that point. So a lot of agents think that as soon as I accept a backup offer, that's when the time frame starts. It only happens if my solar gives notification to the buyer in writing. So right here, this section A seller's sole discretion may notify the buyer in writing. B, after receipt of seller's written notice, to provide written notice, the buyer may remove these conditions. Now, in this particular case, there's 3 conditions: the due diligence condition, the appraisal condition, the financing, and subject to sale of the buyer's property condition. Okay. Sometimes us as agents, we only use this time clause if it is connected to them selling a house. That's usually where I see us using this form, where they say, I've got a house to sell, and the seller says, well, okay, well, I'll let you try to sell your home, but I'm going to continue marketing this property, and then you can remove the condition. You actually can use this form anytime you want in a transaction. Let's say that they decided they needed a longer due diligence period than your seller wants. Say they want it to be, a 3-week due diligence, and your seller says, I don't know if I want 3 weeks due diligence. You could put a time clause on the due diligence, and then if an offer comes in, they would have to remove the due diligence condition and move forward, or they would have to back out of the contract. So it doesn't always have to be in relation to a sale of another home. It can be anything. Your seller can say, I'm going to put it on and keep marketing it, and if I get another offer, you're going to have to remove your contingencies. And it can be any one of those 3. So you check one, or you could check all of them. It all depends on what you're wanting to do with your client. You could check them all. The next thing, number C, additional earnest money. In addition to removing the above checked conditions, buyer agrees to deposit additional earnest money in the amount of blank dollars. Buyer shall deposit the additional earnest money deposit in the same location as the earnest money deposit within 4 calendar days of removing the checked conditions from the rep sheet. So in addition to, okay, you're going to remove these conditions, but I also want you to put a little bit more money down so that I know that you're moving forward. So this is protecting the seller of saying, hey, remove these conditions, and I want you to put another $1,000 down just so that I feel really comfortable with moving forward. So then we look at it and say, now it's a little bit more tricky for them, that if they say, I'm going to stay in this contract, they got to put a little more skin in the game. Now let's say decide that they don't want to remove the conditions. If they don't want to remove the conditions, section D, buyer does not remove from the rep sheet the above checked conditions. So it can be all of them, it can just be one of them, within the time specified in section 1B. So the time we put in there, the 72 hours, 48 hours, whatever it needs to be, then the rep sheet will automatically be canceled, in which instance the earnest money deposit and the deposit shall be released to the buyer. So it just automatically goes. We don't need a cancellation if they don't respond and remove those. Now the question is, how do I send notice and how do I get a response? If I'm the buyer, how do I respond, and how do I, if I'm the seller, how do I give them notice? There's 2 forms in our MLS. The first one is the seller's notice. This is the seller's notice to the buyer. So let's say I represent the seller, I get a backup offer. I like the backup offer. Now I want to move that into primary position if the current offer removes the contingencies. Then I'm going to send them this form right here, seller's notice to buyer of an accepted offer. Addendum, you're going to identify the addendum. So let's say that it was addendum 1 in your rep sheet. Addendum number 1 to the rep sheet contains an option to keep house on the market time clause. That's just notifying that that's where it is. This seller's notice informs buyer and the seller has accepted another offer subject to the rights of the buyers provided in the rep sheet. That would mean that it's in a backup position that they've accepted as. Buyer is advised that upon receipt of this seller's notice, buyer shall remove the applicable conditions from the rep sheet in writing, whereupon agreed upon time. So it's basically saying, we are now giving you notice. You've got 72 hours to respond. Otherwise, this is canceling and your buyer's going to get their earnest money back. Okay. Now from the buyer's side, let's say the buyer says, yeah, let's do it. Let's remove the contingency. We're good to go. Everything's good. There's a thing called buyer's notice to seller of removal of conditions. And then it says addendum 1. So you're going to identify which addendum contains the option to keep the house on the market. So we said it was in a section 1 or addendum 1. So I'm going to write addendum number 1 to the rep sheet contains the option to keep the house on the market. And then it says number 2, the buyer's notice informs seller and buyer that the buyer removes all the conditions checked in section 1B of the option to keep on the market. So 1B, if you remember, is this section right here. So if I check all 3 of those and then my buyer says we're moving forward, they are removing all of those conditions from the contract. If I only check the financing ones because they're selling their home and we want to make sure that we can still market it while they sell their home, then you'd only have the 1 box checked, and that's the only one they have to remove from the contract to continue forward. Okay, any questions on that?
I'm just thinking as buyer position 1, I mean, my first impression is I don't really like this, especially if you checked the appraisal one. I'm going,
Yeah.
no, I want to stay in primary. I want the house, but I also want it appraised. So that's my right. I mean, just
Yeah,
because you got a
absolutely.
better offer doesn't mean kind of it's like my due diligence. I mean, it is. I mean, I want to see appraisal on the house I'm buying. My first thought was, oh, wow.
Well, and if you remember, the REPSI is very strongly worded for buyer's protection. Our REPSI protects the buyer where they can get out of the contract for, due diligence. They can get out of the contract for appraisal. They can get it out of the contract for financing. But there's not really any factors in there for the seller to say, yeah, I want out of the contract. If the due diligence doesn't come back nice, can the seller back out of the contract? No, they can't back out of the contract. If the appraisal comes back low, can the seller back out of the contract? No, they can't back out of the contract, but they don't have to sell it at that lower price. So typically the buyer is going to back out because the seller will just say, no, you're going to pay this original price and for the financing. So there's really no, other than a buyer default, the seller can't necessarily get out of the contract unless they put some protections in there. So in this particular case, this is something coming from a seller that the seller wants in the contract. If you were a buyer, you would never put this in the contract for yourself. Now, would you accept it as a buyer from a seller? If you want the home and that's a condition that they're asking, you would have to weigh whether that makes sense for you. So if, let's say they don't have a home for sale, they're wanting to do it, and they say, if we get another offer, we want you to remove the appraisal condition. That's a question you have got to ask yourself when another offer comes in. Because if you say yes, then you don't have that way of getting out of the contract for your buyer. If you're not concerned about it, then you would move forward and just close. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yes, it does.
Yeah. So it's more for protecting the seller, but you'll see this from the buyer side. Typically, I don't like to see all of them checked from the seller because I still want to do my due diligence and appraisal. But if I have a home to sell, the chances of them putting this in the contract is pretty high, because if they don't put it in the contract, then I could take them all the way to settlement and then cancel on settlement because my home didn't sell. And now I just wasted a month or however long of the seller's time, and they're not protected. Okay. Any questions on those?
Hey, I have just a question. I have this form that you're looking at. I printed one last week off of the C21 forms and .loop, and it's a little different than this form. And so I was just wondering, where is this form?
This one's on the MLS. Let me pull up the one on .loop really quick just to see what you're looking at.
Okay. On that one that you're looking at right now, does it have like subject to the sale of your property, or is that?
So that's the one we covered last week, where that's a different addendum entirely. This is a different concept. This is just a time frame for the seller.
This is just time frame. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
So
I completely understand now.
There's 2 addendums that we covered last week. One was the subject to the seller finding a new residence. And
right. Okay.
Subject to the buyer selling their home. So those are 2 of them.
Okay, so we're good because that's the one I was looking at. So I just haven't seen this one on the C21 forms. So I just need to go to the MLS to get this particular form
Yeah, let me pull it up on, let me just look really quick on my dot loop.
and see if it's in there. If not,
see if
maybe we
it's in.
could get it added in there or something.
Yeah, the one thing with your dot loops, this is where I'm seeing a lot of errors happen, is when new forms come out, we update the main list of dot loop, but some agents have saved certain documents and they're reusing them. So I'm seeing a lot of old ERSs that are coming through that are confusing people. So you just want to make sure if you've created folders for your dot loop documents so you can get to them quickly, that you're watching to make sure new ones come up, because there's no way of notifying you that what you're using is bad until you use it. So
is it best to just go to the MLS to get the forms for the latest and greatest, I guess?
yeah.
Okay, I'll just do that from now on. Thank you.
Okay, so in dot loop, I see one that says, here, I'll share this with you. Okay, you should be able to see my dot loop. I just typed time in there. You can see there's the seller's notice in there. Let's see if there's a buyer's notice. Buyer's notice of withdrawal. Seller's notice of multiple offers. So the buyer one is not in there. That's on the MLS. And then let's see what this other one is. So we might just need to add that one in there. Let's see, option to keep market. Let's see if it says comes under option. They'll say option. Yeah, so dot loop doesn't have the two forms. They have the seller's notice one, but they don't have the option to keep the property on the market.
It's the bottom one right there, Jason.
What's that?
It's the bottom one right there on your list.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah, so it does have it. There you go. We'll just pull that up and see.
Yeah, that's the one I have. I just don't have the one that you're going over today. I don't think that's in dot loop.
Well, this is the same one. It's just, we got these boxes filled in and it looks different as far as like, but as far as like you see the number one, this is the old one. That's right. That's why.
Yeah, because the appraisal situation's not on this one.
Well, it's here. It's in the middle. It's financing.
Oh, it's in the middle.
appraisal
It's down there.
is right in the middle. So the new one is separated appraisal and put financing with subject to the sale of the buyer's residence, which I actually think is better, because what we were seeing happen is what agents were doing is they were saying, okay, we'll remove the subject to sale of our home and we'll continue with the property. And then if their home didn't sell, then they would back out of the contract based off of financing. And so they were trying to get away from, they were trying to go around the time clause and just stay with the contract. So now that that's connected with the sale of the home, so that's actually protected. So I'll make a note of this one and see if we can get it changed in dot loop so that you guys can use the right form. But you know, keep up to date. I mean, that's the thing where I was talking at the very start about, you know, we're getting a little bit lazy with how we're doing our business because things change all the time. And if we can just be on top of that, that's what's going to separate you from your competition, is you knowing, you know, these are the right forms, this is how we use them, which is kind of what this call is about. Is, you know, yeah, I'm going to tell you about the problems we're seeing, and 99% of them you guys haven't done, which is fantastic. But at the same time, we're also going to introduce all the new forms, and we're going to also introduce things that, you know, will help you guys through the process. So just keep that in mind as we go. Any other questions today? That's all I've got for for you guys. So if there's any questions, I can stay on and answer those. Otherwise, you guys have a great day.
Hey, I have one question.
Uh-huh.
Just on personal property, if like the buyer and seller want to sell some furniture or whatever, I know that there's like a couple of options. Like, is it better to just do a bill of sale outside of closing? Or is it, obviously, sometimes as the loan goes through underwriting, they don't like to see all of that. Just would love some direction on if there are options or if there's a way that you would prefer we do that process.
So that one's 100% dictated by the lender. Okay, so if the lender, so I can incorporate that bill of sale into the contract, and the lender might say, no, I don't want to see that. I need that out of the contract. In that case, you would need to do a separate bill of sale outside of that contract, which there is a form on the MLS that's the separate bill of sale, and then you just fill out the items for that. The lender doesn't like to see it because what they're afraid of, and it makes sense, but it's also kind of tedious in my mind, but what they're afraid of is that they're loaning on a house at a certain price. And they're afraid that if you include items, that's included in the value of the house, and those items can walk away from the house. So let me give you an example. Let's say the house is worth 600,000. The bank says I'm going to lend for 600,000, but then the seller decides that they're going to include in the sale of the home, if the buyer gives them 625,000, they'll include them a boat with it, so a $70,000 boat, and that's why they're paying the higher price. The lender wants to make sure that that value is what the value of the house is, not what the value of the house plus the items. So they're going to make them say these are worth nothing, so the house is worth what it is. So that's where they're coming from. So it's kind of tedious in my mind and saying, you know, this is what the house is, but you're adding all these other features. And so you can walk away with those because that buyer could walk away with all of the items, and then the house would be left there. And they're looking at it, I don't want to have a house that's worth less because the items are gone. So that's why they're wanting a separate bill of sale. So that's how I would do that is if the lender won't let you do it, then do it on a separate bill of sale. If they will, then just put it in the contract. But that's a lender.
Okay, and if you're representing the seller or the buyer, it's okay to call whoever the lender is on the other side to see how they want that, or?
No, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you represent the seller and the buyer's wanting to do something, I would just ask them, it says, you know, if we put this in the contract, is the lender going to be okay with it? And if they say yes, then go ahead and put it in there. But most lenders that I know, unless it's like the fridge and things that are normally in the property, they're not going to want that on the contract. You know, they're not going to want to do that. So
Okay.
if that's the case, then you just want to do the separate bill of sale, which is what they've created to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Nope.
Okay.
Just
next-
that you made a note, Jason, to try to update that so we can get it on .loop, the correct one. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, I will do that. And then next week is Summit, so we won't have this call on Thursday, but we will the following week.
Hey, Jason, can you send us that form? Can you email us the one you just did? Or is
Yeah, I
that
can do that.
difficult to do that?
No, it's not. It's not hard to do that. I can email that out. It is just on the MLS. So if you go in your forms on the MLS, it's just called the option to keep property on the market.
Okay, I'll just grab that. Oh, yep, there it is. Thank you.
No problem. You guys have a great afternoon. Call me if you have any questions.
Thanks so much.